What's up, everybody? I'm Jason Visenberg.
And I'm Michael Visenberg.
Welcome to Viseland. Mikey, what are we talking about today? I know it's something near and dear to your heart.
Yeah. So the episode this week, I figured why not go over the Hoop Summits. I started off thinking ranking the Hoop Summit classes and everything like that. I don't think that's fair at this point because the last two still haven't really had a chance to become the full classes that they deserve to be. But I figured why not go over some of the Hoop Summit players, give some context of what it was like at the time, and then also delve into them as either both as draft prospects and just their NBA success in general. So we can go over some of the teams, get into some of the stories and some of the little things going on there at the time when they were prospects, and then talk about them a little bit as players as well. With a heavy focus, of course, on the game. The very cool part that I've gotten to do with the Hoop Summits from 2012 to 2019 is that I have been able to go to all the practices possible that I could go to, and then the game as well. So yeah, just figured I've met so many great people through this and seen a lot of fantastic players. So just to give an idea of what this, which is truly like beyond a high school all-star game, and I feel like just has a completely different vibe than the typical high school all-star game. When you're talking about like McDonald's All-American or Jordan Brand Classic, like these guys are really playing for something. It's USA versus the world. For those who do not know about the Nike Hoop Summit, I describe it as 12 of the best players under 19 from all over the world versus 12 of the best or among the top U.S. high school seniors. And also in that, I figured that I can go over maybe some players that were left out of the game that I heard maybe had gotten an invite, but there were some extenuating circumstances as to why they couldn't play. So yeah, just give kind of a little behind the scenes and re-up of these Hoop Summits that I've been to.
And just for a quick background on the Hoop Summit, it's an event. It started in 1995. First game was in Springfield, Massachusetts. You had guys like Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, Antoine Jameson, Robert Traylor
Yeah.
was starting on that team. So I mean, it's
He still has the USA block record. He had 9 blocks in that game.
yeah. So there's and then I think it was one of the first times we heard about Dirk Nowitzki as well back in
Broke the single game scoring record, which has since been broken, but yeah, he still has the international scoring record.
So yeah, it's definitely a game that has produced its fair share of guys, but we are just going to be focusing on the events that Michael has covered specifically. So we're going to be 2012 to 2019. But obviously, the internet is your friend if you want to go look at those old 1995 kind of games. You got to really take that trip down very good memory lane with a lot of guys when they were younger. But yeah, let's hop into it and really just start from 2012 and just work our way towards the present. So that was the first game you really got to cover fully.
Yes, it was. I had covered the game the year before, but hadn't been to any of the practices. Will say I immediately am going to fact check myself. Enes Kanter did break Dirk Nowitzki's international scoring record. Enes Kanter had 34 points in the single game that he played in 2010, and Dirk Nowitzki had 33, which was his huge coming out party when he played. But yeah, getting into 2012, that was just it was a completely different time. It was the first event I would say I really covered like as media, and I got to go to these practices. Like it was completely insane. First off, like I get there and I remember like it hasn't been like this ever since, but the first year I get to that first practice and there like just weren't very many NBA people or anything like that. It's most of the practices are at the Portland Trailblazers practice facility, and I get there, not a lot of people that first day. Ever since then, the event has just grown so much and the attendance has really gotten up just in terms of personnel, agents, and media covering the event. So it was interesting to be there and be like among the few that first day. But yeah, beyond that, the story of 2012, I would say, was Andrew Wiggins. And Andrew Wiggins was at the time a high school sophomore, would later reclassify, but he was I think it was kind of unprecedented that a player that young, or like, even like somebody that wasn't a high school senior, would usually be in the game. I know there had been like some younger international players, but somebody like playing high school domestically, and Andrew was at Huntington Prep in West Virginia. And it like the world team, doesn't really like bowl you over. So the two big players, like the amazing thing of this world team was that it had two future number one picks in the NBA draft. At the time, I don't think a lot of people were saying it had two future number one picks on that world team. I don't think people were really like leaving the Nike Hoop Summit in 2012 and going, I think Anthony Bennett is going to be the first pick in the NBA draft. I do not believe so. He was one of the better and more highly ranked players in high school, but I never remember being like blown away with him during the practices. He had some also like a few like minor tweaks and things like that. But I remember NBA scouts being very blown away with Andrew Wiggins, just the combination of speed, of vertical athleticism, and even like the shooting potential. Like I felt like in drills, he shot better than Anthony Bennett. They would usually be on the same hoop. And the other player that I really felt stood out for the world team, I guess there were a couple that eventually became NBA players. Dario Saric had been in the Hoop Summit, I believe, the year before as well. And he had been like on the hoop scene and prospect scene for quite a while. And I think he had like a really good game. And Wiggins ends up being the leading scorer for the world team. And
but Dario finishes 13 points, 14 rebounds. And yeah, he was in the game in 2011 as well. So it was his second.
Yeah. Well, the thing with Wiggins is he finishes with 20 points in 33 minutes. Dario finishes with 13, 5 assists, and 14 rebounds in 25 minutes. So really impressive. Anthony Bennett hits a huge three-pointer. Anthony Bennett finishes the game with 7 points, 11 rebounds, 2 assists, only 2 of 8 from the field, but hit a huge three-pointer that I felt was kind of like the game clincher if it wasn't the game winner. The world team wins that 84-75. Getting into the USA team, it was a pretty underwhelming group. And to me, as somebody that was new to events and everything like that, like this was amazing. I remember that class just was full of like these big men. And unfortunately we didn't get to, see all the ones that I remember one now president of a team. He wanted to see Isaac Austin. That was the one player I remember he had kind of hoped to be in the game. The centers themselves, pretty underwhelming. The two guys who were the top of the class were Shabazz Muhammad and Nerlens Noel, who was also reclassified later.
Ended up being the only two lottery picks of that USA team.
They were. Nerlens does end up going higher, but Shabazz was, I believe, considered, if he wasn't considered the RSCI number 1 guy, he was number 2. And he was just like the alpha of the whole thing as well. It straight up said he was born in 1993 on the USA roster. So the fact that it came out a year later that he was actually born in 1992 still hadn't been discovered yet. But
just
yeah,
paperwork. It's just paperwork.
It was very strange, but nonetheless, I was impressed by Shabazz Muhammad. And they needed Shabazz Muhammad in that game. He was the person keeping them in the game. They had, I believe it's still the record for the fewest points scored by a USA team in the Hoop Summit, the 75. And Shabazz broke the single game scoring record. He had 35 points in the game. He did take 27 shots. But yeah, it was Shabazz versus Wiggins, and Wiggins' team won. The other player who was pretty impressive just throughout practices and in the game and just with his versatility was Kyle Anderson, who was
Magic Anderson.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, like he's 6'9" with like a 7'3" wingspan. Like, and he really has skills, man. So he
finishes with 12, 10, 4 assists. Yeah, he's always kind of had that versatility as kind of a
definitely
handle the ball.
Definitely. And I feel like that still comes through with Memphis. And then I remember it was like kind of a group of shooting guards, and it was Archie Goodwin, Gary Harris, and Rashid Suleiman. And I remember thinking, like, I guess I kind of liked Archie the best. Gary ends up being the best by far. And I was kind of like, I'm not sure where to rank all these guys at that point. The centers, very underwhelming. I remember somebody like during practices, because Mitch McGary was kind of like the big name, but even with Shabazz change in birth date, like Mitch McGary's straight up birth date was still older. He was born, he was only 8 years younger than I am. Born June 6, 1992, I remember. And I remember like him kind of being underwhelming in the practices, and a scout who I believe is still around, saying like, this guy's like a year and a half older than everybody, and like this is what we're getting right now.
Not a ton of front court production there between Tarczewski, Tony Parker.
And no. And then this is the world team usually plays each other, which is fantastic. The USA plays a team that at the time was known as Club Sports Finest. That same executive I told you about who wanted Isaiah Austin called it that. Later,
familiar with the Portland, basketball scene. A lot of people from the Lake Oswego region that think they're the best players in the world tend to gravitate towards Club Sport. And
Club Sport is also directly across the street from the Portland Trailblazer practice facility. So it was just I feel like they were college guys. I honestly, that first year I knew nobody playing, and I don't think it was like any like big name prospects. Since it's definitely changed. But yeah, that first year was I definitely thought I knew a lot more than I did. I read my old scouting reports from it and I completely cringe. But yeah, it was fantastic. Really good game. The player who also really killed it in the game and made up for the USA not having a lot of centers, Wang Jae Lin. Wang Jae Lin has 18 points, 11 rebounds in the game, man among boys. Truth be told, probably was the case. He does end up getting drafted in 2016. So that's 2 years after anybody else from this game was drafted. The USA has Nerlens Noel, Shabazz Muhammad, Archie Goodwin, Gary Harris, Mitch McGary, Kyle Anderson, all his first round picks. The world has the 2 number 1 picks with Anthony Bennett, Andrew Wiggins. Dario Saric goes 12th pick in 2014. Wang Jae Lin is the 57th pick. I believe the Memphis Grizzlies drafted him, and he has yet to come over, and I don't believe will ever come over. But he was really fun to root for. It took him a while to get going in practice, I'll be honest. But by the last day, you're like, this is like a kind of a fun guy. And he really killed that game. He was a big presence for them and a huge reason that they won.
Well, in some cases, USA gets a little mini advantage in the fact that some of these guys have played at like USA mini camps and things like that before, where the world guys are all kind of coming separately. There's usually no more than like 2 or 3 people per country generally, right?
One thing I will say, yeah, and you have a great point there. The thing I will say is that the world team used to get there a couple days earlier and have more practices. And I think that really helped. And then I think the USA kind of caught on and they changed things around and made it so the practice schedules were a bit more equal. But yeah, that is true that the USA players usually do know each other better. It's also like a huge factor is the athleticism of the guards, and that usually is a big factor as well. So having like a couple athletes like Andrew Wiggins, like Anthony Bennett, very big. So that was cool, and them also playing like domestically in the USA. Like, at the time, Anthony Bennett was with Finley Prep, and Andrew Wiggins with Huntington. So yeah, it was I think kind of like the birth of a number of domestic players with world ties playing high school in the United States.
No, that definitely became much more of a trend, and then now it's kind of you got that mix of guys playing back in Canada. I know it's particularly, but yeah, 2012. Like looking back on it, and it was your first year, but yeah, like how do you think it lived up to the expectation you had at the time?
At the time, I was blown away. It was the best thing I'd ever done. Like I thought it was amazing. Looking back on it now, pretty underwhelming USA roster and pretty underwhelming world roster. Like just not the number of pros. And then especially if you go to that next year, you're like, oh my God, like we're really kicking it up a notch. Like that was I think that first year, like even with USA like not doing like they lost scrimmages to Club Sports Finest too, like in 2012, which usually doesn't happen. Like every now and then they'll get the better of them, but yeah, like it was pretty bad. But that next year I think kicked it up a notch in a couple different ways. And
yeah, so 2013, you kind of do have this like top of the class narrative of like Andrew Wiggins, Jabari Parker, which one's number one, and then all of a sudden this other guy is coming to the gym from Cameroon, Joel Embiid.
Yeah,
comes through. You got someone who's going to be the number one guy. The next year, again having that kind of like junior guy come in is still awesome. Yeah. So you really got like a lot of people thrown out on the court. Yeah, like especially that international team is pretty deep at the top. Like, yeah, what was the practice like between Karl Anthony Towns and Joel Embiid? 8 years ago.
it was like that world team was, I think, the best Hoop Summit team since I've been doing the game. Like that, it was just a fantastic team. You had 3 guys going the first round that year from that world team. You had Dennis Schroeder, who like I think really helped his stock that week. I know most people in practices felt he got the better of Dante Exum, who ends up being a top 5 pick that next year.
Schroeder was super smooth. Like that was like
he was quick.
My take, really quick. That game, like it was Exum. I remember they were talking him up like because his dad played with Michael Jordan, and there's all this like very high praise. And again, like they kind of sold him a little bit as kind of also possibly a point guard. Which
that's what he was. Yeah, definitely. And that's what he started off his NBA career as well. Like that was, I think, was going to be his position, but at the very least was a combo. His shot was a little inconsistent, but he would like Dante Exum had size, and he was really, really quick as well. So I thought he played well in practices. I remember like that last practice, I think he played really well. And they played well in the game. Andrew Wiggins had not yet announced where he was going to college. And I remember the last day, he had finally like reclassified, everything was set. He was going to announce like that next week, I believe, like shortly after the Hoop Summit, he finally announced. It was between, I remember Florida State, where both of his parents had gone, Kansas, North Carolina, and I think Kentucky was the other one. And Andrew ends up going to Kansas. That last day where the last practice where people were hoping to interview him, I remember they came out and said he's not taking interviews today, and he just shut it down. The other thing I remember is a Nike executive saying, I would like to see more energy out of Andrew Wiggins in the practices. Andrew, like the year before, where he just produced this incredible amount of excitement, he was still like that same level of athlete and everything like that, but was he like dominating the practices or going as hard as you had hoped? Probably not. He seemed kind of exhausted, maybe mentally, from just the pressure and everything that was going on at the time, and people wanting to know where he was going to college. And so I also remember somebody asking that same Nike executive if he had ever had to worry about that with LeBron, and that Nike executive going, hell no. And so yes, as far as Karl-Anthony Towns and Joel Embiid, that was awesome. And just seeing their relationship was really cool. Karl-Anthony Towns came in there. He was the youngest guy on the team. He had another year of high school. He eventually reclassifies as well.
But he also he came off in the Olympics, right? Didn't Dominican Republic make the Olympics and Coach Cal?
Did they make it, or were they like the last team out? Either way, he had played for Coach Cal with Dominican Republic. He and like he's from New Jersey and everything. I felt was like taking like a leadership role on the team. Just the communication, everything like that. And I remember somebody asking me about like how Cat had looked and everything. And then me saying like, man, like he really seems to want to be here communicating. He's working really hard. He's just kind of taking a leadership role. And then I remember an NBA scout going like, see, that's what I told you, man. And I felt awesome, like seeing the same thing that an NBA scout had seen. But yes, so Cat shooting really well also in the practices. Joel Embiid just looks super smooth, but was really raw on the court. And like he wasn't necessarily dominating practices either. You have him going up against Mamadou Jaita. And at one point he goes, tell him to stop pushing me. And then he was settling for threes, and somebody, like one of the high scouts of the event, goes up to him and says, man, people think you're kind of a wimp. Like, you're settling for threes. And at one point in a scrimmage, Joel knocked down a three, and a person who would later be an NBA like top executive said, like, just not even like whispered, like said it pretty loud. Yeah, that's nice. Now get your big ass in the post.
Yeah.
You could tell things at the time were very different in basketball than they ended up being. It were like, if I saw it now and saw Joel Embiid shooting threes, I knew that he was going to be like, you saw the way that he moved, you saw the strength and just like that natural ability. And you knew that he was eventually going to be good. I just didn't know it was going to be as quickly as it happened at Kansas, but like that he would overtake Andrew Wiggins. He would have been the number one pick if he hadn't broken his foot.
No,
like that would have happened.
He was the kind of
people
player
were just worried about injuries. He even had back issues, like back spasms during that week, and missed some practice time because of that. But yes, incredibly talented player. Sergey Karasev from Russia did not miss a shot. Like, he was just fire. So I could understand why they end up, I believe he was drafted 19th by the Cavaliers. And yeah, he just never really ended up being very much. Livio Jean-Charles looked really good in practices. And he was just like one of those kind of like hybrid forwards, probably closer to a 4, and definitely like seemed to make most of his work in like around the basket and as a slasher, but it could hit some shots as well. And he had the best game out of anybody. Like, he ends up scoring 27 points, has 13 rebounds. I felt like he kind of like killed Julius Randle in the game. But yes, let's move on to the USA for a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about some of the world guys as well. But yes, I like Jabari Parker. I know after the game and or after the week and like before pre-draft, some of the other outlets had Julius Randle higher, and then I know like pre-college they even had Julius Randle higher. I left that week feeling better about Jabari Parker than I did about Julius Randle. It turns out that I was right when it came to draft pick. I was wrong when it came to actual basketball future. Granted, Jabari Parker has been hurt and everything there, but yeah, Julius Randle has been a very good player. I did not think Aaron Gordon really set the world on fire. I was really worried about his shooting. He would be practicing shooting and like just free throws, and every shot would look different, and it wasn't great. He greatly improved there. The guards were very underwhelming. Yeah, like Casey Hill was straight up like he was just older than everybody else. Kind of looked like the smoothest and best there, but he didn't set the world on fire during the game. The Harrisons had kind of gotten like a reputation as being, they were saying that like, you know, Kentucky could beat the Charlotte Bobcats and stuff like that. And maybe that was true, but nonetheless, like they get to Kentucky that year and don't necessarily set the world on fire. Yeah, it was, they just didn't seem to be like the best team. I felt like they also both did not play particularly well in practice. Like, and Andrew has a pretty good game. Like I would say one of the better games for the USA. Aaron doesn't score of the Harrison twins. And then, yeah, like Noah Vonleh, pretty quiet in the game as well. I was always intrigued by him as a prospect. And, you know, Bobby Portis looked solid, looked like he was going to be a few-year guy at Arkansas. A solid team, but that world team was just a buzzsaw. Like they were so good. They had the athleticism to compete with them. They had the experience. And that was just so much fun. And the world ends up, I think this was the biggest margin the world's ever won by. The 14 points that they ended up winning the game by. Final score of 112-98. Andrew Wiggins has a pretty solid game. He has 17 points, 4 assists, 9 rebounds, only 6 of 16 from the field, 1 of 5 from 3. Dennis Schroeder, 18 points. Dante Exum was 16. Joel Embiid barely shot, but had 7.7 rebounds. Only had 1 blocked shot. And then the other player who eventually, and it took a while, but eventually becomes an NBA player, was a player who was like pretty much an afterthought and barely played in the game. Gabriel Deck out of Argentina. I know he had played well in FIBA events, and he's been in Spain and playing pro. Did finally get signed by the Oklahoma City Thunder to a long-term contract as well. So yeah, very cool that they ended up getting an 8th player from the world team to the professional ranks.
And I think it's the first time that the world team does back-to-back victories as well.
Yeah.
The history of the event.
It was big for the coach of the world team for all of the years that I did the game, Roy Rana, who's now out of Canada, who was coaching at Ryerson University in Toronto.
Yeah, now he's an assistant over in Sacramento. So
Sacramento, yep.
Things like this, you know, they're good for the players. They could also be real good for the coaches. But
definitely.
Moving on to 2014, we have the return of Karl Anthony Towns, but you really have a lot of interesting guys coming into this game. Again, starting with the world team, this one guy shows up, Nikola Jokic. What are your initial thoughts watching him practice?
My first day I was there, I was not blown away. Like I just, thought, I think I looked at the body. I didn't think he was very fast. Like athleticism used to be like this huge thing for me. I think it was just something that was kind of ingrained.
Seems trendy. Trendy seems like a like hot buzzword. Yeah. But like
so at first, not blown away. Later, he has like some of the best scrimmages I've seen a player have. And so I saw the talent, I saw the ability eventually.
Super solid front court too. Like guys that he,
Oh man,
in practice, you got Karl-Anthony Towns is back. You also have Clint Capella.
Clint Capella, who didn't have the best week, and like I honestly think the Hoop Summit may have hurt Clint Capella's draft stock. But yes, like it shouldn't have. And I think for those that watched him in France, and I definitely should have done more of that. They saw the talent. The Clint Capella did have like that incredible athleticism. You could see, like, I love the way that he ran the floor. He was a great vertical athlete as well. Certainly, you could see some of the things he could do, like just his rebounder, shot blocker, rim protector in general. And he, but yeah, didn't have the best week. Jokic I felt a really good week. I don't know if he helped or hurt his draft stock. I'm guessing he at least got in front of like some good eyes, because Denver does end up taking him, and I think that was just the right spot for him.
He went in that draft. He did go 41st.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because he goes behind Clint Capella, who was expected, and then Damian Inglis, who I felt had kind of an underwhelming week. Like, he was somebody that you really wanted to like. He had like the measurements, he could dribble a little bit, he could shoot a little bit, but it just seemed like he didn't necessarily have like the mean streak or like the drive of Olivier Jean-Charles from the year before. And I would say they were slightly similar, but yeah, he was a little underwhelming, I felt. And the guy who I like seemed to be kind of the leader of that team was Emmanuel Mudiay, and he was one of the top ranked high school players.
Committed to SMU at the time.
He was committed at the time. Prime Prep has issues, I think, that probably kept that from happening, and he does go to China, and depending on who you speak to there, kind of underwhelmed a bit, but he certainly, like, I left that game like thinking that he was the best player from that team, of which I was terribly wrong.
Well, Jamal Murray's there, but this is, again, he's a junior, so like
the two best shooters in practices, because they shoot a lot in those world team practices. The two best shooters were the youngest guys, Jamal Murray and Svi Mikhailuk.
And then you say Mikhailuk came in after too, wasn't he not initially on the team? Or
yeah, he was a late addition, and we were stoked because he had done some really good things at the FIBA youth level, and was just a really intriguing prospect. And he commits to Kansas as like a 16-year-old. It's like crazy. He was a super young freshman. Like, he wasn't even eligible for the draft as a freshman. But yeah, he was a really fun player in practice. I didn't feel like he necessarily killed it, but he was very intriguing. I thought Jamal Murray looked really good. And the thing that I said after seeing him that first year at the Hoop Summit, where he potentially would have had 3 more games to go on, he does reclassify as well. I was like, if you're a smart school, you will offer Jamal Murray. Like, he had it. He could shoot, he could dribble, super competitive. Yeah, I was very high on Jamal Murray immediately. Also very high on Karl-Anthony Towns. I actually wasn't high enough on Karl-Anthony Towns, but again, felt like communication, just he does a great job. He does have some really nice flashes. He had this like tremendous dunk during a scrimmage as well. But in the game kind of came a little short. Like I thought Jaleel definitely got the better of him in the game. And I like Trey Lyles. Like I really liked him. The thing with him is when he didn't have the ball, he wasn't doing a ton off ball, which I think was slightly noticeable, but he was a really intriguing prospect as well. And certainly like as like that stretch 4 kind of player. But getting to the USA, I just felt like they just worked a lot better than the year before, like as a unit. And the guys who really like played well in the game were the three Duke guys. I felt like I know Kelly Oubre did some really good things as well. Kelly Oubre also had probably the highlight of all of the practices when he dunked on Mike Moser. And Mike Moser, I will say, who was just coming off his senior year at Oregon.
Formerly of UNLV and UCLA as well. So
and he played in the Hoop Summit as well. Mike Moser lights up the USA in the scrimmages. Like he was mainly being guarded by, like, I felt like it was mainly Cliff Alexander, and he just lights him up. Like it was, it was definitely eye-opening. But yeah, Kelly Oubre gets a really nice poster on Mike Moser. And, you know, obviously very intriguing player. Cliff, the thing I also noticed, they used to do a practice at a boys' school, and they would let the media in, and then the players would just kind of give like a little camp for the kids that went to that school. It was really nice, and I just thought it was very cool, like a great experience for the boys from the school. But before they all got there, they practiced for a little while. And the thing I could tell is that while he was a better vertical athlete than like a Jahlil Okafor, Cliff's footwork was not like close to Jahlil. Like Jahlil had like really nice offensive footwork. I was impressed with Jahlil Okafor. I won't lie. Like, and goes to college is great. The guy I liked the most in practices was the guy who actually had the worst game, but he ends up being the highest pick, Stanley Johnson. And really liked him. Just thought he was kind of like a man on a mission. I remember him being a good passer, just really strong, work ethic. And then Justice in the game is really good. Great athlete as well. And I thought the Duke guys, just like the three of them, like Tyus, Jahlil, and Justice, worked really well together. And they kind of reminded me of watching the Kentucky guys in 2011. And they end up winning the national championship as well. Yes. Miles Turner, it was kind of like, it was my first time seeing Miles Turner in person, and it just seemed like he was kind of hurt. And I think that may have been part of the reason why he didn't really play too much in the game.
Yeah, he only ends up playing 8 minutes in the game.
And he kind of underwhelmed me. I didn't like the way that he moved. But yeah, I was very wrong on that, and super skilled player. I think he was just also like a genuinely great guy. And he didn't necessarily like kill it in college, but I think you could see flashes, and he probably ends up being the best NBA player currently from that USA team. So yeah, it was a cool game. I feel like the world team like kind of underachieved, but yeah, neither class was like incredibly star packed or anything like that. Like Kat ends up being, I think by far Kat and Nikola Jokic end up being the best players from this. Jokic obviously is our favorite, and I believe the NBA favorite for the MVP. But he worked on his body. He definitely developed a lot since this game. And if you watch that game and can say like Nikola Jokic looks like the best prospect from this game, then I join me at the game in 2014 and tell me that, because I would not have thought that watching that game and watching the practices, even with him having the dominant scrimmage.
That's why it's always, just awesome to see the progression and see what happens next. But yeah, it's interesting. It's another class too, where it's like the balance of, overall what prospects end up becoming better kind of is still kind of in the world favorite because you look at Jokic, Kat, and Jamal, kind of the three.
Definitely.
With
It would have been nice if they had actually played up to that, but yeah, it was funny because you do end up getting all these great prospects from that team, and the USA still, it seemed like they were in control pretty much the whole time.
And then moving on to 2015, it's actually one of the first where we actually have we end up with the 1, 2, 3 in that same draft going on. What was your take on, seeing this is the first time Thon Maker makes an appearance?
It is the first and the last time that Thon Maker makes an appearance. But yeah, those world practices were so much fun. And you had a couple mismatches, I felt, because they would play these guys on each other like pretty much the whole time. Scalabissiere against Thon Maker, mismatch. Not necessarily for who you would think. It was for Scalabissiere. Scalabissiere was one of the talks of that Hoop Summit for sure. The other one was Sheck Diallo against Ty Wynyard from New Zealand. Ty Wynyard, fun, very strong, really raw at basketball, and he was committed to Kentucky. Just it doesn't end up working out, and Sheck definitely was such a better athlete and got the better of him for sure. And then the guy who played out of his mind well in practices and then has a fantastic game was second-year Hoop Summiter Jamal Murray. And he was great. I even remember they had a end of game kind of play that they were doing, and Jamal fires from past half court buckets. He was just on fire.
No, he definitely left with a ton of buzz after the game. And yeah, and it's
he got a few late offers. We'll say that, Jace.
Yeah. No, definitely his recruitment, it definitely spurred. Obviously, Thon was also there, and I know obviously there was a lot of intrigue on, because even I remember when we went to go see Orangeville Prep Athlete Institute where Jamal and Thon were playing, we went for Thon more than necessarily Jamal. Thon was
very big prospect.
Yeah.
He was. And he still played well. And I remember they had a shooting drill, and it was Scalabissiere, Thon Maker, and Ben Simmons, and Thon got the furthest of them in the drill. You'd have to make 2 in a row to move on. And Thon could shoot. It was funny because they said that Thon was 7 foot, 216 pounds, I think. And then they had Scal as 7 foot. I think they only gave height and shoes. 7 foot, 216. And you looked at their bodies and you're like, there's no way he weighs only 2 pounds more than this guy. Just huge difference in strength. And Scal just seemed to really know where to be on the floor. He looked like a stud that week. He looked really good, was really bouncy. Thon still ends up getting the starting spot, but yeah, Scal ends up having a really good game as well. He has 21 points, 6 blocks, 6 rebounds. Jamal Murray with 30 points. Ben Simmons almost with the triple-double with a world team record 9 assists in the game, 9 rebounds. Ben was just running point. He looked good. To me, he looked really good. I know there were questions about Ben.
Were there any shooting kind of concerns that he has now at that time, or were people thinking it's going to come together?
Of course, yes. Ben had a really tough time in that shooting drill. You can go back and look. I think Carl Berman from Net Scout still has the tape of Ben in the shooting drill, and you weren't confident in him as a 3-point shooter, but that wasn't his game. That wasn't the thing that he was doing. He just had that incredible passing ability, his ability to handle the ball. I mean, he was strong, athletic. That was Ben Simmons. So yeah, I still left that week feeling like Ben Simmons was the best long-term prospect. And I guess you could maybe argue for a couple other players in this game, but I feel like it's still Ben. Joe Chi was kind of interesting, but he got hurt. There was a tape of my friend Ty Kish from City League Hoops, like of Joe Chi making like a ton of mid-range jumpers like in a row. But yeah, he was like ridiculously tall and long. And I will save a Joe Chi anecdote for some other time, but yeah, it was and George DePaula had these huge hands, but yeah, I wasn't really blown away. He was kind of getting some draft buzz as well. As far as the USA team, yeah, like this was, I would say, the coming out party for Brandon Ingram during the week. He was really good. He kind of, I think he was always ranked pretty highly, but he like really rose up in the rankings after this weekend. And I think rose up like in the NBA conscious as well. Jaylen Brown was always kind of considered like the top USA guy, but it became a definite conversation between the two, which Ingram ends up winning when it comes to the NBA draft. And I think even now, like, while Jaylen did make his first All-Star team, Brandon made his first All-Star team the year before. And like,
pretty close, yeah.
It is pretty close, yeah. And I would think like this season, Jaylen Brown is having the better season, but yeah, it's definitely close. Luke Kennard does have the best game of anybody in the USA and was shooting really well. I also like the fact that, he could dribble and pass a little bit. So yeah, he has a very good game. Yeah, just a really solid team. Jalen Brunson was always a player that I really loved as well. Ivan Rabb kind of underwhelms, and he was always considered one of the top players in that class. And I another thing with me not really liking the way that he moved very much, and just I feel like his stock in the NBA draft circles was kind of hit after this week. Yeah, Chase Jeter, Steven Zimmerman don't really kill it and don't necessarily like help their stock in a tremendous deal. Biggie didn't look great. Biggie Swanigan, Caleb Swanigan. I went back and read my scouting or my breakdown after the game, and Biggie was committed to Michigan State back then, so it was funny.
Ends up at Purdue.
He ends up at Purdue. He's a great college basketball player. He does get drafted in the first round.
Two-time Portland Trail Blazers. The Blazers trade him away.
Yeah.
Trade back for him.
A player that you wanted to root for.
Yeah.
I remember, so Jamal Murray crushes this game. Really fun. Like, this is the closest game. And the USA does have a chance to win at the end. They give it to Alonzo Trier, and he shanks it pretty badly. Alonzo Trier still does finish with double digits. But yeah, like I felt like the guards were a bit underwhelming. Isaiah Briscoe, also who had just won the Nike Peach Jam that summer before, finishes with 9 points, 9 assists. Yeah, it's funny because they both do play some time in the NBA, but they go undrafted in 2017. You have more undrafted guards with Alonzo Trier in 2018 and Malik Newman in 2018. Malik Newman has literally played one NBA game at this point. But yeah, just a fantastic game. I was glad that the world team won. They were just so much fun. And I thought Sheck Diallo was going to be quite a bit better than he ended up being. I loved his defense. I loved just the versatility they brought there. I thought he moved really well. But yeah, like a really raw basketball player as well. But a very fun week and tremendously fun team.
Yeah, and again, if you're a Jamal Murray fan, it's also good game to watch because yeah, they're pretty raving about him during the majority of the game if you watched it on ESPN.
Oh, it was Jamal Murray, Scal, Ben Simmons. Those three were fantastic.
And then moving on to 2016, we have another kind of game when you look back on this class at the game. There were some high picks, but not a ton of guys that necessarily super materialized.
I don't know. I would say just at the time, like this, this was the best USA team I had seen like at that time.
And Markelle Fultz as the number one.
Yeah, so the number one player at the time was considered a kind of a toss-up between two guys. Harry Giles, who was a DNP and showed up to the game, like showed up to practices and everything, but he had torn his ACL and you knew he wasn't going to play. And Josh Jackson, who shows up late, gets off the plane, gets some shoes, and gets in there and immediately like goes full court and dunks it. And people are raving about that. The guy I liked the most in practices, like just thinking he did the best in scrimmages and was a player that I was always very high on, was Jason Tatum. Loved Jason Tatum. I loved the offensive footwork. His shooting from mid-range at the time. People worried if he was going to extend his range. It turns out that yes. And then he also just had like a tremendous ability, like instincts as a defender too, like always seemed to be in the passing lanes. These guys thoroughly whooped the Portland Generals. And there's a reason I'm talking about this USA team first, because like they were just so much fun. They were stacked. They were so good that like, I think this is honestly the first time where they were too good for the Portland Generals. And like, they just decided to kind of scrimmage against each other, which was really nice. And you kind of wonder why they don't do it a little bit more. But yes, this USA team was stacked. I remember Danny Ainge sitting next to my friend Sean Moran, and Sean saying like, Danny was saying like, these guys are, I'm looking at a bunch of studs. And they really weren't. Like, they were just, you had positional size, you had just tremendous talent.
And he ends up, Danny Ainge, by the way, ends up with two of them. He gets obviously Tatum, ends up becoming his guy, and then look at what just happened. Peyton Pritchard.
Exactly. All those years later, Peyton was almost seen as like an afterthought after playing with the Portland Generals for the 2 years.
Well, yeah, sometimes they feel like they give, it's the local Portland person.
Yeah, but he kills it in the game.
Yeah.
The other guy who killed it in the game was T. Ferg. Terrence Ferguson has a run in the game. He had a self 18-2 run where he hit 6 3-pointers in about 3.5 minutes. It was just insane, man. And like T. Ferg is like a guy who usually doesn't really dribble. And like he made a few pull-up threes. Like it was really impressive. I remember like watching the replay of the game and everything, and Fran Fraschilla like going absolutely crazy about him. T. Ferg at the time, I believe, was committed to Arizona, does end up going to Australia. But yeah, he had, I thought looked good in practice as well. Like with him, it was always like good vertical athleticism and the shooting and the defense. And the shooting hasn't seemed to have materialized in the NBA. But during this game, he was like unconscious and he hit 7 threes. I believe that's a Hoop Summit record. He was, he was awesome. I know that there was like, at the time, like sort of I don't know how much of a conversation it was, but I like Jonathan Isaac a lot better than Wenyen Gabriel. And
you're not wrong.
Isaac looked good. And yeah, and then Kel was really good in practice as well. Like you could see the pull-up shooting ability. The guy was constantly moving, could handle, could pass, his creative finishing. This was a week where Markelle Fultz really helped his stock. I believe immediately afterwards, he when ESPN or the DX guys released their breakdown of it, they had I think Josh Jackson 1, I think Harry Giles 2, Kel 3, and I believe Jason Tatum 4. And like beyond Harry obviously having the injury issues at Duke and then kind of coming along pretty slowly there. One thing I also will say is it was cool with Josh Jackson. He had a girlfriend at the time, shows up to the game. She just was drafted as the 4th pick in the WNBA draft. It was Kaiser Gondrzik, and she played for West Virginia. She was, I think, a little bit of a surprise as the 4th pick in the WNBA draft, but just thought it was cool and just remembered seeing her at the game, and his mother, Apples Jones, playing a little bit at the practice facility, and she could really ball. Jarrett Allen hits a gimme 3 at the end. Frank Jackson looked pretty good in practices also. Yeah, almost everybody from the team, I think outside of Josh Langford, ends up either spending some time in the NBA or, being drafted. And so the reason I'm talking about the USA so much is while this may have been at the time the best USA team, the world team at the time was definitely the worst team that had been there since
101-67 final score. So not even a
hugest point differential in the history of the Nike Hoop Summit. It was just really underwhelming. 2 guys who I think really would have helped. I had this on the wrong thing. Yes, 2 players who would have really helped matters. Thon Maker, Lauri Markkanen, both pulled out. So that was a huge issue there. And honestly, 2 of the best guys in practices were the Australian guys, the William McDowell White and Harry Froling. And I started to call Kostas Antetokounmpo Roastus because Harry Froling was roasting him in practice. And Harry Froling ends up going to Marquette and SMU, doesn't really set the world on fire there, and then goes back. He was one of the best guys in those practices. Truly, Isaiah Cordinier didn't necessarily tear it up. The guy who ends up as the high point man, Wesley Alves Silva out of Brazil.
With 9 points, there's a log jam of people.
Yeah, not even a double-digit scorer. The best prospect on the team by far is Deandre Ayton, who you would hope would have played that next year as well, but I think he's kind of his experience of it was maybe a tad soured by the week. The one thing I will say about Ayton, beyond just having the incredible physical tools and the skill in soft touch that you still see to this day, he was there with his mom, his best friend, who I believe, or a good friend named Anthony McNish, and I think it was his little sister. And you see this giant 7'1", he was huge. I think he's 7'1". And he's holding this little girl's hand, and it was adorable. It was really, really cute. A late addition was Udoka Azubuike, who I think kind of helped matters. Udoka is enormous. I still don't know how he's 16 at the time of the game. But he was fun, and he was a really good interview, really nice guy. Fanzai Ming, yeah, it was cool to have him in the game. And I remember I have a great picture of he with a guy who coaches the Portland Generals, coach of Lake Oswego High School, Marshall Cho. This game was an absolute slaughter. Justin Jackson barely plays. I think he got hurt, and this was the Canadian Justin Jackson. So you do get a few guys who make the NBA from this team. Ayton, of course, being by far the best. William McDowell White had, I think, went to Summer League, and Udoka got drafted by the Jazz this past year. Kostas, of course, is an NBA champion with the Lakers. Justin Jackson from Canada, who eventually goes to Maryland, I believe, is back in Canada playing professionally there. Yes, it was just a complete housing of a game, and the NBA scouts definitely loved that USA team.
Yeah,
And I don't think we're blown away by a lot of what they saw from the world that year.
but things kind of change. I mean, same outcome the next year, but 2017, the world team kind of gets this like Canadian invasion going on, where you got, RJ Barrett, who's kind of deemed sort of the next chosen one of like Canada basketball. Obviously TBD on how that's gonna pan out from in the long run. But you got like RJ, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Lindell Wigington, Luguentz Dort. Kind of a lot of those.
You got the 5. I still have some great pictures of them. Yeah,
cool,
that was really cool. I interviewed each one.
2 or 3 is usually kind of the max per country, like that you.
They knew that they needed at least like some athleticism, and that's a huge part of what they were lacking the year before. Like beyond a guy like DeAndre Ayton, who was like, at least physically and athletically at the level of, or above the level of even some of the USA players. The guards are always like a huge deal in this game, and all of these guys were either guards or wings. And having the cousins from Hamilton Heights in Tennessee, originally from Ontario, in Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, very cool. RJ, I think came no, he was there. Luguentz was a late addition. He was. I think it might have been, I don't know if I have the year wrong, but I think Mitchell Creek might have gotten hurt, and there was an Australian player. No, it wasn't even. I don't know. I'm guessing I'm forgetting completely, but whatever it was, Luguentz was a late addition, and he only had, I think, like a couple of the last days of practice to play. Lindell looked pretty good also in practice. Eventually goes to Iowa State and plays a couple years. Undrafted, but has played a little bit in the NBA. And Nick Richards also was kind of like the standout center of the team. Also a very cool thing in that the son of a former Oregon Duck who was being recruited, I think at the time, but ends up going into the NBA draft, and that is Isaiah Hartenstein. And yeah, like I will say this was a year where, yeah, they have a couple big guys who I don't think helped a ton during the actual game, in Felipe Dos Anjos and in Ike Obiaku. And yes, huge rim protectors. I too many bigs. It was too many bigs. The guy who ends up leading the game and scoring for the world team is Kosya Mashidi out of Germany. He was considered an NBA prospect. I honestly was not blown away with him. And he played pretty well in the last practice, leads them in scoring, but yeah, like I don't think he helped his stock a ton during this week. Yeah, really fun team. Barisa Simanic shot really well in practice, but yeah, I just felt like in the scrimmages was kind of a bit underwhelming, and then didn't do very much in the game either. Shai's leadership on the floor, very evident, like looked really good. I thought Nickeil honestly played the best out of the Canadian guys in practice, maybe beyond RJ Barrett. And yeah, I really like Nickeil, definitely shot better than Shai, but yeah, you could see the talent there with Shai. Obviously, the physical tools. And then as far as the USA was concerned, this was a team full of studs as well. They looked really good.
Also a lot of juniors. You got Wendell Carter Jr., Michael Porter Jr., McGary, Trent Jr.,
So
Jackson Jr., Troy Brown Jr., and Kevin Knox II. So, it's definitely
a ton. a couple former NBA players' kids in Jaren Jackson and Gary Trent. Having Troy Brown Jr. going to Oregon, and I actually got to have lunch with him at Whole Foods. It was rad. And he's just fantastic.
Yeah, super nice. If you ever get a chance,
I really like him as a person.
A nice guy.
But yeah, Jaren Jackson Jr. has a great week. But the talk of the Hoop Summit was Michael Porter Jr. And he was considered the number one player in the class at the time. I remember Scout eventually goes back and changes their ranking to DeAndre Ayton, like later on in the summer before they play their first college games. But yeah, Michael Porter Jr. in the scrimmage that's open to the NBA. The NBA people are only allowed to go to one USA scrimmage. So that's usually like the most heavily attended scrimmage out of the entire week. And they can go to all the world ones, just one NBA one. I don't exactly know why. But yeah, Michael Porter Jr. just kills it there. The shooting, the size, the athleticism. He still like gets his head at the rim, like on rebounds. Really fun player. And he was just, he just really stood out. The guy I felt played the best game for the USA, though, was Jared Vanderbilt, who I remember they were doing a like King's Court, like one-on-one thing. And it was Jared Vanderbilt, Kevin Knox, and I believe MPJ. And I think Jared Vanderbilt ends up winning it. that was really cool. And then, yeah, like just a great group of guys. Like they were just really like fantastic people too. So yeah, you had Wendell Carter Jr., who was just a really good player. Colin Sexton has a great week there. He was really, really good, super intense, like really like flashy, the speed, the athleticism, the scoring ability, but also like, playing well in like pick and roll and things like that. He was one of the standouts. Gary Trent Jr., you could see just the shooting. Muhammad Bamba, of course, like is insanely long and like rim protection crazy, and his ability like just on like a lob radius. Kevin Knox, like, yeah, this was the second time I'd seen him. I had gotten to see him at Adidas Nations, and neither time does he really blow me away, but he was so young, and you could see the physical tools, and he, like, you could see the shooting potential, I suppose. Quad A Green, unfortunately, gets a concussion, is playing pretty well, but yeah, definitely was, I feel, behind the two other point guards there. And then the big point guard at the time, who I, after this week, reevaluate, was Trevon Duval. And Trey could just like always get to the paint. Was a point guard I really loved. Also, like, big wingspan, good handle. But his shot during this week, like, you finally got to see him shoot a little bit, because he could just always get to the paint and always finish at the basket. And then when you finally saw him shooting from range, and then realizing that even like with that athleticism and that ability to get to the basket, it may not completely, like, it's not an elite level. It definitely, I felt Colin Sexton was the better point guard of the two after this week. And but really solid team, and a lot of NBA guys who also get there immediately. And I do remember talking to a scout, and I know this was big, because I think the draft Twitter community liked this class more than they liked the class the year before. The NBA scouting community, I think, was the other way around. They liked 2016 more than 2017 in terms of the high school class, and then 2017, 2018 in terms of the draft. But yeah, 2017 produces a ton of NBA talent as well. And I think it's still like a debate. It'll be fun to see like who ends up being the better class. But yeah, you get like Jason Tatum, De'Aaron Fox out of 2016. And then right now, like, Jaren Jackson Jr., Colin Sexton, Michael Porter Jr., Gary Trent Jr., who I feel has been.
Yeah, like on the Raptors is super coming on. So like, yeah, what next year holds for him will be interesting.
Then you have Shea, RJ, Nikhil, Lou Gents, all looking really good from the world team. But yeah, very fun game. And it was so cool having like the 5 Canadian players. And it would have been, I don't think they ever like played all 5 of them together because that would have been probably a little strange.
Yeah.
And they were all wings and everything. And that would have been kind of fun. I would have been interested in it. Like, put Shea at center. Who knows? He could have been the point center.
Well, the next year you do get 2018, we do get a triad of Canadians there because RJ comes back, that same pattern of underclassmen. He brings Andrew Nemhard of Gonzaga.
And his other buddy.
Ignas Brazdeikis, who also played.
Ignas Brazdeikis. And the first time I got to see all 3 of them was a scrimmage that they had against Ryerson University. They did lose the scrimmage because Ryerson University was a university and these guys were like 14, 15, 16 years old. So yeah, it was really fun to see those guys go up against college kids, and then they just get so much better as the years go on. The world team was a lot of fun. It was just a really good group of guys.
You have Oregon Duck and Fale Dante.
You do. And you had Charles Bassey, who ends up having a fantastic game. You have Jalen Hoard, who ends up having a fantastic game. Those guys get 31 rebounds on their own, and the world team ends up out-rebounding the USA 60-42, which I think really helped them win this game. And then as far as I will say Baptiste Chouafé from France was another fun player. You had 2 French players with Jalen Hoard and Baptiste. Josh Green, I thought was fantastic in practices as well, and just looked really good to me. He looked like a future lottery pick. He wasn't that far away, and jury's still out in the NBA so far. You have Leandro Bomaro, who becomes a huge draft guy in 2020, and I wasn't blown away with him. Like, I honestly wasn't. But yeah, you could see like the talent, and certainly can handle the ball, did well in pick and roll situations. The shot was really funky and just kind of had like a hitch to it. But yeah, he ends up becoming a good player and should come over and play in the NBA for a while. And then, yeah, you have the guy who was considered the number 1 player in the class at the time, was RJ Barrett. You would have hoped he would have gone up against more of the guys who were kind of like fighting for that spot. And he goes up against one, and the one was Cameron Reddish. And he was, I can't say a complete dud during the week, but he was disappointing. He was definitely disappointing during the week.
Yeah, I don't think he provided the matchup you wanted between.
Well, like, he did. He just didn't take advantage of it at all. Like, that was the thing. Like, they match up in position. Like, yes, they were going to go to school and play together at Duke, but this was the matchup that we were kind of waiting for, and Cam just didn't really live up to billing. The other huge issue for the USA team, and I think this would have been a very different game had it kind of gone otherwise. I was hoping, and so this was the first year that I had a chance to go to the USA October minicamp, which is kind of a place where they sort of decide the team.
In Colorado Springs.
And I loved Cam Reddish during that week. Loved Zion Williamson. Thought Bull was like just under those guys. And another guy who I really liked was Nasir Little. And I'd really hoped that Nasir Little would be in the game. He does really well in the McDonald's All-American game, does well in Jordan Brand. They don't put Nasir Little in the game. And then, like, it becomes even more perplexing because Zion Williamson gets hurt in the McDonald's game. He's out. Keldon Johnson gets hurt in Geico Nationals. He doesn't ever play really in practices, but like he's trying and everything like that, doesn't end up playing the game. Romeo Langford is hurt. I don't exactly know why. Those are three pretty big wings. Obviously Zion's like whatever he is in a big, but yeah, like those were three huge players, huge scorers, like definitely guys that were pretty hard to replace. And the guy that they bring in to replace them instead of Nasir Little is Cole Swider. And I don't get it. Like he didn't really move the needle for me very much. Yes, he gets added late. I didn't understand David McCormack being in. I know he had played well at Les Schwab and everything, but I had kind of hoped that maybe one of the other prospects would be there. Yeah, it's funny. They list Keldon Johnson and Romeo Langford as DNP and they don't list Zion. Zion was definitely there and didn't play. The guys who do play quite well for USA are, in the game, Bull. Bull had kind of gotten hurt and was sort of hurt at Geico. I felt like he didn't really kill it in practices.
Yeah, because what's a week of practice with like Bull?
Yeah.
Like, 'cause I know I guess like intensity is sometimes.
It definitely wasn't there.
Yeah,
but in the game, he was a lot of fun.
Totally. Yeah.
You had 6 block shots. USA record 14 rebounds for Bull, and then 12 points as well. People knew he was going to University of Oregon, so that was very cool.
They knew he was a genius.
What's up?
They going to Oregon. Obviously, they do basketball IQs at 100%. Genius level. But what about Tyler Hero? Because he only gets 7 minutes in the game, but obviously,
yeah. At USA minicamp in this game, not blown away by Tyler Hero at all. Like I was just it wasn't my thing. I saw he was a good shooter. I'd seen him at Adidas Nations too when he was on like a really bad team where like he and Matthew Hurt were like the two best players. Yeah, like I wasn't blown away and I turned out to be quite wrong. And yeah, like I thought in practices he was quite underwhelming and like I didn't like how he went up against some of the more athletic players. But yes, like the movement shooting and everything there. I probably should have kept a closer eye on that. And I definitely misevaluated Tyler Hero in these settings. And then the guys who did play like the best in practices and in the game were Quinn Grimes and Darius Garland. And I have to mention this because he did pretty much kill them in the scrimmage. Kevin Porter Jr. would have been fun to be on this team because he does end up killing them in the scrimmage.
He drives, makes it down from Seattle.
Yes, he does.
And then I know
I had seen him in a Martin Luther King Day game, and he looked really good. And like, you could just tell as a 3-level scorer, as a space creator, as an athlete. He looked like a McDonald's All-American level guy to me. And in the scrimmage, he definitely opened NBA people's eyes. And it would have been nice to see Zion against RJ. That would have been the big thing here. But yeah, RJ Barrett ends up finishing the game with 20 points, 6 assists, 9 rebounds, and tying a game record with 5 steals, and also doing it while shooting 8 of 20 from the field in typical RJ Barrett fashion. But yes, he
Gotta do what you gotta do.
he was the MVP of the game. Like if they gave out an MVP, it would have been RJ Barrett. As well as, you have Charles Bassey with I believe game record 16 rebounds, and then not far behind him, Jalen Horde with 15. So yeah, very cool. And this is the last time that the world has won the game, because there is only one other game.
There's only we're fortunately in our second consecutive year of there being no game. So
yeah, they at least announced a roster, and I'm sure one day we'll get to that roster. I want to watch just a little bit more on some of those guys before I talk about them. But yes, the 2019 Nike Hoop Summit.
Little did we know at the time it was going to be the last one we were going to get for a while, but
yeah,
definitely looking at that world team. Nico Mannion,
I didn't love him in practices either, but you could certainly see the talent there. He had kind of underwhelmed at the McDonald's All-American game, which was considered like a matchup between he and Cole Anthony. And then in this game, he and Cole Anthony basically like play one-on-one and go back and forth.
Yeah, 28
lots of pull-ups.
5 for Cole.
Yeah, lots of pull-ups, lots of their team needing them to score points. And you could say that Nico, like, probably, like, just when it comes to efficiency and everything, has the better game. But yeah, Cole Anthony just makes some really impressive plays. Those were, I would say, the definite leaders of their respective teams. The other player who stood out for that USA team was James Wiseman. And I know that he was even polarizing back then. But yes, the NBA people left that week very impressed with James Wiseman. You can actually go back and read my articles with NBADraft.net, but I wrote this one for the Stepien. And yeah, you could see my like little tidbits and everything there. But yeah, James Wiseman does play well in practice. This was like, people had always wondered about his intensity and like, just the fact that sometimes he wouldn't like necessarily bring it hard every time he was on the floor. And Isaiah Stewart used to kind of kill him when they would play each other. And this was a time where he finally started to get a little bit the better of Isaiah Stewart. Vernon Carey Jr. didn't have a great week in practice or the game. And yeah, like this was where James kind of separated himself a little bit between at least those two players who were always considered like amongst the highest in the high school class. And the other thing was James like shot really well here, which seems to have carried forward.
6 of 8.
You can worry about like his hands, his defensive acumen, like those things, but the guy is tall as hell and has tools and like runs really well in a straight line, can jump. That was all displayed here for sure. Tyrese Maxey was a guy that I really liked in practice too. Showed like even some displays of shooting from long range, which I know hasn't necessarily been his forte to this point, but yeah, like his floater game and ability to score as a slasher definitely on display here. Wendell Moore Jr. does really well in the game. Yeah, that was the other interesting thing, because he was hurt through most of practice, and it was kind of like a toss-up if he'd even play in the game. And this game ends up being really close, and like he made a huge difference. He finishes with 13 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists. He's their second leading scorer. That was a big difference. Guy I really loved this week was Isaac Okoro. He just shut down Jaden McDaniels when they played in the Portland General scrimmage, and just great defense overall. Of course, with his passing acumen as well, and some semblance of ball skills. The other thing he did that was really cool, and I have a live picture of, is he dunks on Kyler Kelly on an alley-oop. And Kyler Kelly was one of the leading shot blockers in the NCAA for Oregon State. and I thought that was really cool. Scotty Lewis is somebody that I kind of thought had a bit of an up and down week, just from, I think, some of the issues you see from him at Florida. But as always, the thing that stands out about Scotty Lewis when you watch him practice and run sprints is he is like a world-class sprinter. Like, it's crazy how fast he is. Yeah, in a straight line, he's just ridiculous. Yeah, Isaiah Stewart does fine, and I think still, people really like him. They just like how hard he works, but doesn't necessarily kill it.
Big bodied guy.
Doesn't necessarily kill it here. Jeremiah Robinson Earl, with all the things that people usually say about him as well, and he's a winner. He can make some outside shots, and he looks pretty good here. Matthew Hurt also, in practice, he's their best shooter. He's just a bucket. And he, like he had done at the October minicamp, got the better of Jaden McDaniels in their matchup as well. So yeah, I thought Matt Hurt looked pretty good here. It was, fun team. And the world team does have some really nice players as well. I wouldn't say, obviously during the game, Nico Mannion was the star. Precious Achiuwa does have a nice week here and does some good things off the dribble, does not pass to anybody, which has never been really Precious's game. But yeah, really good athlete and good physical tools. There were times in practice where he definitely thought he was a point forward, when in actuality it's probably best if he's a power forward center. A guy who looks really good in practice is Didi Louzada Silva, who just got signed to a long-term deal with the New Orleans Pelicans, does immediately enter the draft. He goes up against Josh Obiesi for, I think, most of the week. And I know Josh Obiesi was kind of getting the draft buzz and everything, but after this, I liked Didi much more. And he was another guy, great defensive instincts, really good shooter, had that nice athleticism as well. So yeah, he's a player that I'm really looking forward to seeing the NBA. It was the second year for Big Kofi Coburn. Does not have a great game.
Just declared.
Yeah. Does not have a great game, but ends up being a second-team All-American. And then I think maybe helps recruit Andre Curbelo, who I also didn't necessarily love in practices, but he does some really good things. And then he has been fantastic at Illinois. I think he's coming back. I'm not completely sure, but he has a excellent freshman year. Oscar Shibwe was also a player that I really liked in practice, just great body control, so strong, 6'8" with a plus, I think he's got a 7'4" wingspan, really good athlete. I didn't necessarily love Oscar. I know a lot of draft Twitter people really loved Oscar, but I thought he was good. I thought he was a legit draft prospect, and we'll see what he does at Kentucky, but he certainly was good at West Virginia, just not necessarily what he was billed to be. I thought Josh Green, again, probably looked like their best player in practices. Doesn't have an amazing game, but yeah, he was still really good. And another guy I thought was going to be a lottery level guy, and ends up being 18th in the draft. You have M.A. Moncrief, who shows some nice athletic flashes. You have Howland Guo, who has 8 points in the game from China. And then Marco Pekarski only plays 5 minutes, but scores 5 points in the game as well. Overall, yeah, the USA actually has to make a bit of a comeback in this one. And yeah, it was the Cole Anthony versus Nico Mannion game. It was a really fun show. And for those that have not seen this game before, if you just love watching good guard basketball back and forth, that was Cole Anthony and Nico Mannion in this one. And unfortunately, this is our Hoop Summit history up to this point. So yeah, like thank you for going down memory lane with me. I tried to keep it much more about the players than myself.
Well,
But
we did break down the roster from 2020 as well in a previous episode, and we'll definitely have an episode going over the
2021
roster. That has been announced, but obviously the game.
Oh, the USA. Oh, you're talking about the USA 2020. Yeah. Yeah. In 2020, they had announced the USA roster before the pandemic, and then they never announced the world roster. This year, they did announce both rosters without having the game. But the Hoop Summit is fantastic. It's honestly a week that I treasure every year that it happens. And I've met some of my best friends in basketball through this event. I'm so glad that it's in Portland, and I hope that it is for many years more. Yeah, it's just been amazing to have this in my city. And then I was just super lucky to fly out every year that they had it when I lived in Toronto as well. So yeah, this just thank you for anybody that hasn't heard the Nike Hoop Summit. We hope we gave you some cool background on it. And
yeah, definitely.
We hope for those that have, they maybe get like some context out of it. If you guys have different memories or anything differently, please comment. And if you saw some different things in the Hoop Summit, if you saw Nikola Jokic becoming the MVP of the NBA, let us know, man. Because yeah, we just we appreciate anybody that comments, anybody that likes, anybody that subscribes. It's just been such a big deal for us. And yeah, thank you for anybody that is tuned into Viseland.
Definitely. If you like us both, you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do that at Viseland. Also, if you want to shoot us an email, you want to just talk about someone, you got a hot take, viselandpod@gmail.com. You want to follow me individually on Twitter, Instagram, whatever, I'm at Jay Visenberg. You want to follow Michael on Twitter, that's at NBA Draft Mikey V. And definitely, as he said, if you can like, subscribe, review, share, we appreciate the love, guys. And we just love bringing this show to you. And we look forward to giving you guys another great episode next week. So definitely check this out. Give us any comments about people that you had a hot take on when you first saw that Hoop Summit game. And we will see you next week.